This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, everyone. Those that are here in person as well as those joining us in cyberspace. Welcome to the September 10th meeting of the Lake Forest Board of Education. We will begin this evening with a Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. So please join me. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And in a moment of silence, if you'd please remember tomorrow, September 11th, will be our 19th anniversary. Thank you. We'll begin this evening with roll call of board members. We'll start with Mrs. McCloskey. Here. Mrs. Starkey.
Here.
Mr. Thomas.
Here.
Vice President Rao.
Here.
And President Earl Dempsey, serving as chair, is here. All 5 board members are present. Thank you all for being. Move on to section 2, item 2.4, approval of agenda.
Make a motion we approve the agenda as presented. Second.
A motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we will move to a vote as we have done previously with these hybrid meetings or our virtual meetings. I will try to remember for each vote we will do a roll call vote. So we'll move to a vote now. Mrs. McCloskey.
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas. Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Sorry. Mr. Ralph.
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey.
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Motion carries 5-0.
Item 2.5, approval of minutes. I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from August 27th as written. Second.
A motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on the motion? Hearing none, move to a roll call vote. Mrs. McCloskey.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Rao.
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey.
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Motion carries 5-0. Move on to item 2.7, citizens participation, the opportunity for members of the public to address the board. I do not believe we had anyone signed up in person. As well online, we had asked for anyone to make the district office aware just prior to the meeting, and I do not believe we have anyone signed up there either. So we shall move on to Section 3, item 3.1, financial reports. Mr. Kurt Kellerman. Welcome, Kurt.
For this evening, we have the monthly board reports for July and August. We'll start with the July board report. Just as a reminder, with the last board meeting, we did approve the preliminary budget. So all the budgeted revenue and expense numbers now are reflected from that approved preliminary budget. The state typically loads 90% of our prior year revenues. So you see there's, some of it's about 93% because we did reduce our projected budget revenues for next year in anticipation of a lower unit count. So that's why you'll see a little bit higher numbers there at certain percent. But pretty much that's about typical for the start of the fiscal year. As far as the local funds, very little local funds recorded since it's a timing issue when the tax deposits come in. So really the only local funds right there are the our accounts. And then the federal funds, those typically don't show up until September, maybe October the latest. It should be this point. Overall, we received 66% of our projected revenues compared to 65% last year. Are there any questions on revenue? July.
I see that.
Moving on to the expense side, for the Board of Education operating unit, only shows 11% remaining. That's only because of the largest expenses you guys have right in front. So that's typical for that operation. Did have slightly elevated local salaries only because we had a prepaid month. And then we also had some large payouts for vacation and sick pay for retirements. But otherwise, everything else proceeded progressing normally. On the first page there, the second page of the expenditure side. Again, everything's pretty much as expected. Your Division 1 salaries are right on track. And overall, we have 91% of our budget. Very 90%. Question?
Any questions for Mr. Kellerman on July? All right, going to August.
Moving on to August, no really substantial changes on the state revenue side, with the exception of the balance of funding for our opportunity grants, which is really the only major change. Moving down to the local funds, we did start to pick up our first tax deposits, so you start to see some of the local funds particularly tax deposits. And again, no change on the federal side. Overall, 67% compared to 65% last year. Questions on the revenue? And then moving on to the expense side, really, again, nothing significant to report. Some of the operating needs are covered, the majority of the funds up front in the year. So that's why you see maybe some that show a lot lower budget. For instance, administrative services, we have a copy of contracts that we put on purchase order. So typically cover a lot of funds and operating. Tuition reimbursements paid out twice a year. The first of those August. That's why we have budget. Moving on to page 2, Division 1 salaries pretty much right on target. The only other area of concern, the debt service and those payments that we have expended there, $138,000, are a little bit more than I was anticipating, but I've already sent a couple of emails to the treasurer's office to find out why we see that a little bit. That's my understanding. It's supposed to be fixed every month for fixed amounts, but I haven't heard back. But overall, we're at 83% of our budget. We think we're at 4% back.
Any questions for this? Seeing none. Thank you, Kurt. This will be an item up for vote towards later in the agenda. Item 3.2, Board President Report. So I believe we are day 3, so 3 days down into our new school year, our new endeavor, our new world. I just want to say thanks to all of our administrators for putting out any fires that may have come up, for our staff who's being on the front lines and doing a great job with students and families, to our students for being patient and working through the technology that I'm sure a lot of them is new for or has forgotten over the summer, back having used it last in May, and then certainly to our parents and our community for their continued patience and support as we all work through this. We put a plan together, and we thought it was a great plan, about as best a plan as we possibly could come up with given the circumstances we're operating within. I'm sure on a day-to-day basis there are some parts of that plan that don't go quite as intended, but everyone seems to be really adapting and adjusting and rolling with it, and appreciate everybody that's involved. With that said, so certainly one thing in the news today is, DIAA and a vote that they've made and the decision to reverse course and to make a change based upon a decision that was made last month, and not weighing in on whether we should or should not be playing sports. We'll just use it as an opportunity to illustrate just how difficult it is for everyone in this room and everyone listening to make a plan when the rules keep changing. As a kid, you always hated playing that board game with a guy who always changed the rules as you went along. And certainly that's kind of what we're up against. But I'm sure we'll overcome that, as well as anything else that comes up that's placed upon us, or restrictions or changes that we see. But just hats off to everybody, and thanks for that. That is really all that. Any questions for me? All right, 3.3 Superintendent Report, Dr. Lucas.
Good evening, President Dempsey, members of the board, administrators, teachers, and members of the community. As everyone knows, we started school this week with generally been very good return to school. We're seeing the mask wearing, the social distancing, a lot of respect for the environment. The children have been very compliant, a lot of enthusiasm, and so far it's been a really good start. And I foresee things getting better each day as we get better at knowing how to exist in this new environment. I really think it's important to take a minute to recognize the teachers tonight, thank them for their efforts, not only over the past few weeks, but these past several months. I'm not sure people know this, but the skills that our teachers have needed the past 6 months or so were not taught to them in college. They've literally had to reteach themselves how to teach while teaching. And it's remarkable how well they've done, how much growth they've shown, and I just wanted to thank the teachers here tonight. We've had some concerns. We've had some connection issues. We had some hardware and software issues, but both our school level personnel and our CBO personnel are working extremely hard to try to keep everybody connected, to make sure everybody can get a device or get access to a device. And we're still expecting inbound devices so that we can get a Lake Forest device in the hands of every student as soon as possible. Secretary Bunting visited us today. We visited Central and North Elementary schools to see students learning. They were learning, they were engaged. It was fantastic. I wanted to thank Mr. Sheehan, Mr. Williams, Ms. Dotson, and Mr. Truitt for hosting us. And then I'd like to leave you with a couple of reminders. Tomorrow, as with all Fridays, students and teachers are in the fully remote learning environment. That gives custodians a chance to get into schools, do their deep cleaning, disinfecting. And then as a second reminder, Tuesday, the 15th, there is no school for students for the primary election. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Lucas. Any questions for Dr. Lucas? All right, done. On to item 3.4, LFEA report. This is Barb Mills. Welcome, Ms. Mills.
Thank you. I just have one item this evening. I wanted to mention that Mike Kaufman, our DSEA UNISERV, provided liaison training today with the high school staff and administration, and Dr. Lucas and all three of the high school building administrators attended, and LFEA really appreciates that. Questions?
Any questions for Mrs. Mills? Thank you very much for being here. Thanks for all that your staff is doing, and also acknowledge Ms. Valberg, whose attendance tonight as well. Thank you. Okay, item number 5.1, 2020-21, return to school as a discussion item. Dr. Lucas.
Okay, so we've got about 345 students currently in our hybrid face-to-face kind of environment. The remaining students are in remote learning. We are still at level 2 for the state, which means we can continue in the hybrid model. And we are still on track for our bringing students back in targeted grade levels on October 19th. Right now we're looking at grades pre-K to 1, 4, 6, and 9. Plus our current students are already in the hybrid model. We'll revisit this again in 2 weeks.
Okay. Thank you. Questions or discussion from board? Mr. Rapp.
Dr. Lucas, can you touch on the classes and some of the questions that have come up, including the delay testing attitude to remedy?
So if I understand your question, just talk a little bit about AP testing and concerns
I know that there
about.
are some questions from parents who have kids in classes. I have children who are in AP classes, and one of the questions that came up was the credits hours when that parent factored them out, and also the kids are in general are used to taking the test right after the class wraps up.
Yeah.
With this, the semester model, they're going to have extended period where they're going to have a gap of not having a class and then take the test.
Yeah, those are concerns. I guess if I could just sort of summarize those concerns, we have students taking classes on a semester model, meaning they're going to do a whole year's worth of instruction in the first semester, and then a whole year's worth of instruction in the second semester, but they're taking half as many classes. In terms of hours, just FaceTime, the hours are essentially the same, because instead of them being in class every other day, they're doing the first half in one semester and the second half in the second semester. So they're getting the same amount of time, but there is certainly students that get done in January and they're not taking their AP test in May. There is going to be some expected perishing of skills. So I've talked to Ms. Dupress about creating some twilight opportunities for those students, kind of refresher training, get some kids together for a couple of weeks in the evenings or during some free time. Who knows what the schedule will look like by then. Get those kids back into school and do some refresher training on those AP courses before they take their tests. The other thing is AP, based on the lessons they learned last year, has really created some really strong products through the College Board. Some really good tutorials, practice tests, a lot of things that our teachers can use and they can train those students on that they can continue to maintain proficiency before the test goes. In terms of our second half kids, they're going to take the test without the benefit of not a lot more instruction, but they will be shorted some days of instruction because they're going to start in January and they're going to take the test in May. But really, the really power instruction that goes on, really they hit it hard right before the test. So I feel confident that where the AP kids are concerned, they're going to be in a good place when we take our AP tests come May. You're welcome.
Additional questions or discussion from the board? All right. Thank you, Dr. Lucas.
Thank you.
Move on to Section 9 personnel.
Section 9 personnel offers of employment. I make a motion we approve resolutions 9.1 and 9.2 as written. Second.
A motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a roll call vote. Mrs. McCloskey?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Rao?
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Motion carries 5-0.
Section 12 personnel resignations. I make a motion we approve resolutions 12.1 and 12.2 as written. Second.
A motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a roll call vote. Mrs. McCloskey?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Rao? Mr. Rao?
Mr. Rao votes yes.
Keep getting ahead of myself here. Mrs. Starkey?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Motion carries 5-0.
So much train of thought. Common is that section 12 or 13?
We are on to 13.
Section 13 personnel retirements. I make a motion we approve resolutions 13.1 and 13.2. Second.
A motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we shall move to a roll call vote. If I can get through it this time. Mrs. McCloskey?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Rao?
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Motion carries 5-0.
Section 19 personnel appointments. I make a motion we table resolution 19.1. Second.
A motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on that motion? All right, so the motion is to table 19.1 for next meeting. We shall move to a vote. Roll call vote. Mrs. McCloskey?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Rao?
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Motion carries 5-0.
Continuing with section 19 personnel appointments, I make a motion we approve resolution 19.2 as written. Second.
A motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. Roll call vote. All those in favor, we'll move to a roll call vote. Mrs. McCloskey?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Rapp.
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey.
Yes.
Chair votes yes, 5-0. Making it a little difficult for me.
Section 20, other business. I make a motion we approve resolution 20.1, school choice as written. Second.
Have motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a roll call vote. Mrs. McCloskey.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Rapp.
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey.
Yes.
Chair votes yes, motion carries 5-0.
Section 22, other business, financial reports. I make a motion to approve resolution 22.1, financial reports as presented. Second.
Have motion on the floor properly seconded. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a roll call vote. Mrs. McCloskey.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Rao.
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey.
Yes.
And chair votes yes, motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Rao. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I move on to section 24 for reports or discussion items. Start off with item 24.1, Delaware School Board Association.
They held their first in-person, unfortunately, we're not had a work obligation, but did get notice of that. So just a couple things that I wanted to bring. One, they are seeking to for approval to hold our board meeting virtually and in person. What I understand that that is allows that type of information on survey. That has been a benefit for so many of our families in our community, and online and in person. The other thing that we need to decide on as a board is this. Dr. Marinucci talked about the dual class action lawsuit that is going on, and they're asking each district if they want to be a part of that to sign on to that. There's not really a cost to us, however, we will have to decide how many expenses to put into that. We're going to call checklist. They're prepared to help us go through that. It could benefit our district with some money for programs we've done. The sensors put in the bathroom be compensated. So that is on the table right now. And when we meet November 4th and we'll vote on that, want to be in good sense, of course. We need to decide on that.
The information that would be needed, do you have access to that for administration to take a look at? Let us know how cumbersome or problematic that may be.
Yeah, there is a checklist. Like I said, I have not seen the checklist. I can practice what that would be. But in talking to Dr. Meredith today, he said that they are fully prepared to help the district with that, and it should not be but I can ask for that checklist, like public involvement. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think for us to make a decision, we'd like to share the details with administration, hear their opinion, and for us to have a full understanding of what it would entail prior to going into that vote. So DSBA can provide that to us or to you.
There is an attachment on this.
Okay.
It's attached this afternoon where I received it with some talking points. So maybe with that first, if that answers some of those questions, and then we can also check out that first.
So why don't we do this then in that case? Why don't each individual board member at their leisure take a look at what has been posted and to funnel any questions that we may have through you for the time being. And then, so the meeting, there was it November 4th? Right, so we'll need to make a note for that to go on a future agenda. Is that it?
Yes.
Any other questions or discussion for Mrs. Starkey or DSBA? 24.2 Legislative Committee.
Our first state office. 7 at 6.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. Any questions for Mr. Rao and Legislative Committee? All right, ECAP Policy Council. Early in the year, I'm not sure if we have anything yet. Dorothy, do you know if we have anything?
Not as far as I. Dr. Roberts? Yes, so our ECAT has a card. And so
Thank you very much, Dr. Robinson. Thank you, Mr. Starkey. Any questions for ECAP policy? All right, move on to 24.4, go to the order. Opportunity for board members to address any other particular item discussion that may not have been included on the agenda. Mrs. Starkey?
I just want to reiterate just how proud I am to be a part of the last 2 days. I think between all of my kids, I think be about 20 teachers or all 4 of them. And I've been thoroughly impressed with every interaction, every that has been on the Zoom meeting. Very positive, very professional, unflustered. I was very flustered. They were staying very calm. And, it was awesome. I thought the high school pickups and the middle school pickups were fantastic, well organized, very efficient. So it's just been great to be a part of.
Thank you, Mrs. Starkey. Anyone else? All right. I do not believe we have a need for executive session. With that said, we entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved. Second.
Motion on the floor, properly seconded for adjournment. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Hearing none, I'll move to a roll call vote. Mrs. McCloskey?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Rao?
Yes.
Mrs. Starkey?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Motion carries 5-0. The board stands adjourned at 7:30 p.m. Thank you all again for being here, online and in person, and thank you for all that you continue to do. Stay safe, stay healthy.